Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I want to introduce my guest today. His name is Coach Josh Wood from Strong for Life Coaching. He's a Tasmanian-based fitness expert offering a new perspective on health and physical fitness. Now, Coach Josh has a very interesting backstory, which we're going to start off the episode with. He was born in Oregon, spent his youth exploring the American Midwest, and at 18, he left the United States and embarked on what became a lifelong journey around the globe, traveling through Europe and Asia. During that time, he became a competitive powerlifter, a boxer, a BJJ practitioner, and a wilderness and hiking guide. Now, he's a family man in Hobart, Tasmania, just south of Australia, and spends his free time tromping through the Australian bush and developing new skills such as archery, mace training, and small-scale homesteading. Coach Josh has developed a holistic approach to fitness grounded solidly in the pragmatic and natural world. His programs are highly individualized and efficient, activating muscle development with zero wasted effort. At the core of Coach Josh's approach is an understanding that every person, whether they're a professional alpinist, a mother, a powerlifter, every minute of life is precious, and top-tier coaching will help them thrive. To date, he's helped thousands of folks online and in person around the world become the best version of themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll just have the full disclosure at the top of the show. He's my trainer. So if you've been following my weight loss journey, you know that I'm currently, as of this recording, 40 pounds lighter. And I have Coach Josh to thank for that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here's today's episode, my interview with Coach Josh Wood. I hope you love it. It's going to be great. Let's get into it. We're saying goodbye to the rigid numbers and strict budgets and putting relationships back at the heart of personal finance. This is more than a podcast. It's an invitation to reimagine your money story and journey with us through a landscape of intuitive strategies and abundance. Join a community that nurtures transformative financial mindsets. Welcome to Intuitive Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Coach Josh Wood from Strong for Life Coaching. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Josh.
Hey, Dylan. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, I deal with money a lot, but I always like to say, and I compare a lot of people's money struggles to fitness struggles. And I thought, what better person to talk to than the person who's helping me with my weight struggles? And I just kind of want to level set for the audience. Where did you start with this? Like, give me the epic story that is Josh Wood to this point.
Oh, my goodness. Fitness stuff?
Whatever you're comfortable sharing, brother.
Oh, man. There's just been places, done things. I've been in the fitness industry for 12 years now. Almost 13, I think. I started in 2011 working out of a women's-focused strength and conditioning facility in Melbourne, Australia. At the time, I was actually either had started teaching at a massage school or was just running my clinic at the time. So my background's in education. I worked in teaching manual therapies and personal training for a number of years at a bunch of different institutions in Melbourne and here in Hobart. But I actually got into fitness myself through MMA. When I was a teenager, I was just a slightly more scrawny nerd working at a computer shop. And one day I just was like, this is no life. I need to learn how to fight. And so I was like, I'm going to become a kickboxer. And I never did. I found an MMA gym instead because they didn't have kickboxing in my hometown in Minnesota. And so I was like, okay, well, let's do some research. What can I do? I'm like, oh, man, Muay Thai sounds cool. I'd love to learn that. Nothing available. And there was just this old Irish family boxing gym in an old auto shop that had been around for a few decades. And in the back corner was this Brazilian guy, Mario Roberto, who was running MMA classes on this like 4x4 jigsaw mat thing that he picked up every day at the end of class. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to learn how to fight. And from there, I did MMA and jiu-jitsu for a number of years. And then I was like, okay, I did that while traveling. I did jiu-jitsu when I was traveling in the UK. I remember training at a gym above a pub, which was awesome, and just kept that up as I wandered and ended up in Australia. And then when I got here, I was training mostly in MMA and no-gi jiu-jitsu. And I was like, you know what? The body is an interesting thing. And so I was like, I should learn more about it. And then I kind of started looking into some options and courses and just, like, I didn't know where to go. And I'd studied massage. And I studied massage for about a year and a half. Did 2 certifications in that. And then I got invited back to start teaching. And so I worked in the education space as I was running a clinic. And then as I was doing that, I was looking at, well, this is an industry in which we try to fix people when they're injured. How do we prevent this from happening? And that's where I sort of got interested in preventative medicine. I started learning personal training. And I was like, okay, this is a good building block. This is a good place to really meet people where they're at and make them less likely to end up on my table. And I did that for a while, and I was teaching massage, and I was working out of the fitness facility, the strength and conditioning gym. And then as I transitioned my interests from combat sports to powerlifting, I decided to further my education, and I did a Bachelor of Health Science, but my major was Chinese medicine. So I'm technically
Amazing.
a doctor of Chinese medicine in herbalism and acupuncture. And I did this 4 year massive degree. It was this new degree. It used to be like this 6 year monstrosity, and then they squished it into 4 years and 3 study periods across the year. And as I was doing that, I was competing in powerlifting, and I was doing that, and I was still teaching massage, and I was coaching people in the gym. And I was starting to get the itch to get back into combat sports, and so I started focusing on boxing, and then went and worked out of a boxing gym in Melbourne, and went and competed for a couple of years. And by the time I finished that and finished my degree, I basically decided, well, I've had enough of all this. I don't really want to work in clinic spaces anymore. I'm just going to go all in on personal training and boxing coaching. And then I went over to Canada and taught kickboxing classes and trained a couple people to get into the ring for the first time, and just went all in on the fitness. And that's where, I think it was 2016, where the whole Coach Josh thing kicked off for real, where I was like, this is what I'm going to do. No more dabbling. I closed up my clinic space, went over to Canada with my wife. We lived over for 2 years, and I found a gym to work out of. I was like, okay, this is what I do now. And ever since then, it's been coaching people to get them harder to kill. And out of that, I kind of slowly started creating this ethos around what is it that I'm trying to do with people, because I don't want to just be your average gym bro rep counter. There's more to this. This is how you get more out of life. This is how you actually learn to live. You need to be physically capable to get the most out of your existence. Came up with this philosophy of becoming harder to kill, but then turned it around into a positive. It's about being strong for life. And most of my clientele are like you and myself. We're parents, we're professionals, a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, and people with multiple kids trying to not just be an example for their families and their kids and their community, but get more out of their existence. Climb sometimes literal mountains, or, do a lot of outdoor adventures and stuff like that. And that kind of tied into my work as a wilderness guide that I did for a few years too. Mixed it all together, and I was like, okay, Coach Josh had his time. It's time to focus on getting people strong for life, and rebranded that and created this company with multiple coaches and a nutritionist, and focusing on the lifestyle. How do we reach people and show them that there's a better way? And how do we get the most out of them? And the whole Strong for Life online coaching business and philosophy really took off in the last couple of years. And, it's out of that background of fighting and trekking and trying to grab life by the balls. It's like, okay, we can bring this to other people. And that's where Strong for Life online coaching really comes from.
That is an amazing story. Starting in Minnesota on a 4x4 jigsaw mat.
Yeah.
It's just going, I'm scrawny and I want to learn how to fight. And then you're
Yeah.
traveling around the world. How cool is it to live above a pub? Right?
Yeah.
And train boxing, all the way to this idea where, and I loved what you said of like, this is a lifestyle. And I think where it connects into a lot of the money stuff is people will look at their bank account and they think that this is just spreadsheets and numbers. And if I just hit the numbers, life's going to be fine. But it's not, and it never is. And so I would love you to talk more about that Strong for Life and the lifestyle, and how you see that come alive for your clients.
Yeah, and you've experienced this firsthand. It's really, okay, the first thing we do is we look at baselines, and I'm sure you do this with finances too. It's like, where are you actually at now? Unfortunately, most people have no idea, and it comes down to tracking. And there's a lot of parallels here. And the first thing we do is we start writing things down. We start looking at what you're actually doing. What's your sleep like? What's your recovery ability with your sessions? What's your actual movement quality? We do movement assessment, which you may remember. We do a food journal, because the funniest thing is, like, I worked in gyms for over a decade, and everybody comes in and they're like, I want to get a bigger butt. I want to get bigger biceps. I want to look jacked. And most of the women are like, but I don't want to look too jacked. I'm like, okay, whatever. And the guys are like, I want to look hella jacked. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I go, okay, that's great. We can do that. This is how we look at your programming and your training. What's your food like? And they're always like, yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, no, I think I'm doing okay. I don't think I need a lot of food help. And I go, okay, cool. So why are you trying to lose 50 pounds? How come you don't have the build you want? And people go,
Amazing.
oh, yeah, maybe it's not so good. And that's when I started doing food journals. And with the online space and the online coaching, it's so much easier because I have contact with people 7 days a week. It's immersion as opposed to you come in for your 1 hour session and then we spend half of it going over how shitty your diet is and how we need to get this up to scratch. But now it's daily. I see those food journals all the time. And people start to look at that. And yeah, I'm assuming it's exactly the same as finance. Like you got to put down the numbers and figure out where you're actually at to know how to get to the next step, to
Oh,
know where you need to be, how to map that out, how to plan that. And that's the key is you start off creating these baselines and go, okay, we're here. This is where you're at now. You've got 30 things we need to figure out. We can't do that. We got to pick the one thing or the two things that are manageable and changeable now. And this is this concept that I work on, TNT. It's about those tiny noticeable things because it's TNT that moves mountains. And every day you do one small noticeable thing. And it's like, okay, today I'm going to hit my protein. And for a lot of people, it's like, we'll spend 2 to 6 weeks just going, let's focus on hitting protein. Basic workouts, but let's get that protein right. And that's that first step. And it's like, okay, now let's figure out your calories. We need to get you in a deficit while still hitting that protein. But if I start going, you need protein, you need to search your calories, you need to do X number of workouts, we need to get your steps there, it's untenable. People can't do a million things at once. But starting with the one thing or the two things that have the greatest impact, we stair step that. And I see it all the time. It's like in the beginning, they go, holy shit, I've been eating like garbage my whole life. I'm like, yeah, I know. I knew that when you walked in. I knew that when you sent me the email because otherwise you wouldn't be talking to me. And then it's like, okay, we create that realization. You understanding where you're at. And then it's easier for them to go, okay, this is why I need to make the change. And then we stair step all these tiny noticeable things. And then 6 months later, you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, shit. Like, I don't even think about having to do my workouts. Like, I've got my meals planned for my whole family on the weekend. Like, there's no more stress around food. I know that if I'm going to go out for a social thing, I know how to manage that and stay on track and not just blow out and then give up on everything. And you just stair step these little things until each month, 3 months, 6 months later, you look back and you're like, I'm a different person living a completely different life. And it's only because we tracked and measured and took check-ins, take those photos, take those measurements, that people then realize it for themselves. That's sort of the whole process, and just getting to that point where they look back at themselves or they look back at an old photo and they're like, whoa, that's not me anymore. That's an amazing thing.
oh my God. There's so much to talk about just that. We could do the entire podcast just on that little bit because you're
It's a
completely
lot.
right. When people come in and they say, one of the things I want to just really highlight was you said, well, people come in and they're like, I want a big jacked or I want a big ass or I want whatever. And then you ask about food, right? They're expecting a workout, something they could turn the crank, get the cookie, and here's the result. And you're looking at it and going, what's the deeper issue here? If we're not eating appropriately, we're not going to get the results. You can't outwork this. And it's the same type of thing on money where people come in, we establish a baseline, we look at what their metrics are, we look at how often are you actually having this conversation. And then the very first suggestion is, where do you want to go with this? What does this mean for you? What is the deeper underlying reason? And I remember coming into your program, taking photos of every meal I had, and for the first time in my life, like tracking and actually like, okay, how many protein? How do I put this in this app? Which is weird because I'm an accountant, right? Like, so you'd think I'd be good at this, but I wasn't. And so, like, I really love that bit about looking at the TNT, those tiny noticeable things, and saying you can't get overwhelmed. You might know exactly what they need to do, but can't do it all at once. How often do you have clients who come in and they're starting to make this change, but then they stumble, they fall, they go back, and then you start seeing them in these shame spirals?
Occasionally, occasionally. So part of how I manage that is like in person all the time. Online, much less because there's a better vetting process. It's like you fill out an application. You have to acknowledge where you're at and what kind of help you need and where you're trying to get. Usually people have been following me on social media for a while, or they're familiar with some of my work, or they're in my Facebook group. Some people are kind of aware and have been gathering resources and sort of understanding like how I work and what my thing is, and then what kind of change is elicited by these systems. And so when they come in, they're okay, I'm ready to make the change. This is one of the biggest reasons I got out of clinical spaces and working in clinics because I got so sick of people coming in every week with the exact same problems. And I go, hey, do this list of things and your life would get better and you wouldn't have to see me anymore, which isn't a good business model, but it's a good health model. And people be like, yeah, I don't want to do anything. I just want you to fix me. And so when people come to me now, they're like, I just need direction. I need a map. I need a plan. I need accountability. I'm ready to make those changes. And so that's why there's an application process to become a client. That's why there's this vetting process prior to being offered a client position. And so people are the type of people I work with are more ready to make those changes. And so they're a little bit more resilient. That said, there's still always an occasional person who has some really deep-seated shame around what they're trying to accomplish and where they've been and where they want to go. But the beauty of the online systems as well is that I know when they miss a workout. I know when they're missing a thing, and I can get on top of that early and be like, hey, how's everything going this week? I noticed you're a little late on your workouts that you normally hit all the time. What's going on? And start those conversations where in person it would be like, cool, how has the last week gone? And it's just this big thing. So being able to see what's happening more quickly and act on it stops a lot of those shame spirals that cause people to just disappear. Not always, but usually.
When I've observed you in the coaching sessions with people saying, yeah, oh my God, I fell out the wagon, or I'm feeling like I'm taking a step backwards, and how you've met them there and saying, but your trend line is positive, right? Like you look at all the tiny things you've done, look at how much further you're gone. And I just think that is like one of the core things that makes the Strong for Life concept really different from a lot of other training programs. And when you talk about working in the clinical space and you're seeing people after they're broken, I always kind of think about like this concept of the babies in the river, right? Two guys walk in through the woods, they see babies in the river. They jump in the river, they start pulling babies out. Eventually, one of the guys says, "What? I'm done with this. I'm gonna go find the guy throwing the babies in and deal with him." And this is what this feels like to me when you're saying, "I don't want you to come in broken. I want you to prevent you from ever needing to come in broken."
Exactly. Yeah, prevention. It's great.
100%. One of the other things that was interesting about your backstory and this formation was you talked about being a wilderness guide, and I know that you do a ton of stuff outdoors. What do you think the role of nature is in the Strong for Life philosophy?
Oh my God. I mean, look at my logo. It's mountains and the trees and the sun coming over the mountains. Like it's core. And I don't even I don't even have to tell people about that usually anymore. It's sort of integrated into the brand and the imagery and what I do. Like, it's funny, I was just part of a research project on the connection to nature in backpackers specific to a certain multi-day trek over here. There's a research project going on at the local university that I was interviewed for. And I've been talking about this a lot because there is no separation between us and nature. And so my philosophy is, and I get mad at all the young, greeny, urban hippie kids who've never actually slept outside, but tell you how you're supposed to interact with nature. They create this false dichotomy. There's nature, then there's us. And it's like, no, we are as much part of nature as anything else. And it is essential to our health to have a connection and spend time in the untamed world. We need that. But honestly, most people are weak and fragile, and that makes it hard to actually go out there and experience nature in its full glory. Well, this is where originally I focused my marketing on trying to get people backpacking and hiking. And I still work with a lot of people in that industry. And I do work with some of the local guiding companies, making sure their guides are capable and making sure their guests have support to make sure they're capable to go on multi-day treks. So I think it's essential. It's not something that I really market or push as, hey, you need to be outside all the time, but it's very obvious, I think, in both my branding and in my content and the stuff that I produce, because it's a lot of times it's just like, this is what I'm doing. And it's stuff outside. My gym is in my garage and it's open to the elements. And I get to train in the sunrise. And this morning I went on for a run as the sun was coming up. And I'm honestly blessed to live where I am. But I always say, go outside. And when we talk about doing things like steps and daily cardio and things like that, those things that are essential to your health and to weight loss, where are you going to do that? It gets people outside. It gets people outside, it gets them walking. So it's integrated, but not such a big thing that I push, because it kind of just starts to happen as people get healthier, more capable. They want to go on adventures.
Yeah, I know one of the pieces of advice you gave me was your kind of order of operations here are get calories, make sure your nutrition is on point, get your steps, and get your workouts in that order. And living here in Colorado, you're exactly right. Like doing 10,000
Good
steps in my
spot.
kitchen sounds terrible. So I've been
Yeah.
hitting the trails, but I hear this in finance all the time where the person has like the unique circumstance, right? And I'm sure you've never seen that before, right? The person who's completely unique in their own mind. So what would you say to somebody who lives in the middle of the concrete jungle, like say downtown Indianapolis, where human beings have removed as much nature as possible, and they're saying, Josh,
Yeah.
I just can't do this. What would your bit of advice be to somebody in that situation?
Well, I kind of talked about this maybe a month or so ago on my podcast, and it was talking about green exercise. There's a fair body of research out there on what we call green exercise or green spaces, and your ability to perform and recover, and in particular, be in a more relaxed mental state, so more of a parasympathetic nervous system. You can access that literally by having nature pictures around your training space or in your house, by having nature sounds. Like you can work on a treadmill and do those little video treadmill courses where they have you like following a trail, and like it has very similar benefits. It's, accessible anywhere. If you're training in a home gym, you could open up the windows, you can have some nature sounds in the background, you can put up a picture of a nice tree. Like all those things will actually have physical benefits to you. But there is no such thing as a truly 100% urbanized environment. If you think of the biggest cities in the world, I mean, what makes New York so famous? Central Park. I was just in Melbourne, one of Australia's biggest cities, and there's a gigantic park in every neighborhood. Like there is access to green spaces. You can make synthetic ones, but I don't believe anybody doesn't have access to that. I've got a client in Jakarta, big, massive, crazy city. Still does her walking outside. Still finds natural spaces.
Jakarta is a jungle for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I've talked about this before many times on podcasts about like what is the human underlying all of the problems we're facing, right? So many of our problems are actually caused by the fact that we forget that there's humans at the beginning, center of this. And in my world, it's all the
Absolutely.
economics, right? Everyone's on a spreadsheet. We assign them numbers, and then we can lay them off because we don't think about the families that are being destroyed, the neighborhoods, communities, or any of the other stuff. And I think that's also true with nutrition when people are saying like, oh, it's very simple. Just eat nothing but rice and chicken, right? And they're forgetting the human that's underneath that of like,
Yeah.
breaking bread is part of the human experience. Breaking your fast in the morning with your family and greeting the day together, like this is a part of the human experience. So I love what you said of like, you just get outside because humans are supposed to be outside. So even if you are just walking down the sidewalk, you're still closer to nature. But
Yeah.
I do want to ask when you kind of like look out from as the thought leader in the Strong for Life space, what do you think is kind of the trajectory that we're on when it comes to the lack of a lot of people's nature contact? Where is it as big of a, is it like a hidden problem or is it just something that would be beneficial, icing?
It's an obvious problem. And my philosophy is the more we actually remove ourselves or think of ourselves as removed from the natural environment, the sicker we get as people and as a society. I mean, look at the popularity of the vegan movement. It's the single most removed from nature ideology you can think of, and it's becoming more and more popular. But it's not with rural people. It's not with people who live an agricultural lifestyle. It's not with people who are connected to nature. It's with the overprivileged urban youth. It's like the more we remove ourselves from that connection, the crazier we get, the more ill health we see in people and a society as a whole. And I mean, honestly, God, I think like everybody should be forced to have, 6 months or 3 months or like a stint, not of military service, but of working on a farm, like going out and having some sort of agricultural job where you actually have to manage livestock or crops or work in some sort of nature-based field and see how life and ecology actually works. And I think that would solve a lot of problems and give people a greater understanding of where we come from.
Yeah. I've have long said that I think that at least here in the States, everybody should be required 2 years of service in some capacity. And I think your suggestion of being on farms, I think, is absolutely critical because I've had people. I hunt, and so I bring down wild game, boars specifically, because they're an invasive species. And I've had people
Same here.
say like, well, you don't have to hunt. You could just get your meat from the grocery store. My question to them is always, where do you think that came from? Did you
Yeah,
know
it's
that
a weird
started out
thing.
as a cow, right?
Yeah. The connection to where your food comes from. So I'm in Tasmania and I'm an archer, and bow hunting is illegal for all species except rabbits and hares here on this island. So I hunt rabbits, and I have a half dozen jars of potted rabbit in my fridge. And although my freezer's empty now because I just turned them all into potted rabbit, I eat what I can from what I can source. And I keep chickens, and I eat all the eggs, and I garden. And like understanding where your food comes from makes people more understanding, more empathetic, more kind. Honestly, people always the greeny left group tends to like to make omnivores and normal humans out to be these heartless things, but you actually understand things better, and it makes you kinder to people and animals, I think, in general, understanding what it actually takes to make a natural diet for yourself.
Yeah. Well, it brings into that idea, like people will cite the statistic of, well, people who work at slaughterhouses tend to have higher rates of domestic violence. That's a true fact. It's
And it's a
it,
fucked up job.
exactly. So the question is it because they're slaughtering animals, or is it because those jobs are terrible and stressful, and you've taken the humans, you've
Mm.
taken what is part of our role in nature, and you've dehumanized it to a point. That to me, I think, is the bigger issue, because I've slaughtered things. I've slaughtered goats. I've slaughtered pigs. I've slaughtered chickens. I haven't done the cow yet. But being able to take a chicken that was running around, put it in the cone, kill it, take the feathers off, do the whole thing, gives you a huge appreciation for what the energy production or the energy output to provide you with chicken breasts in the grocery store really is. You know, and I grew up hunting, bringing down pheasants and white-tailed deer in Wisconsin. And so it was never a strange thing to me. And trying to help that with my daughters, I think, is absolutely critical. But as long as we're on the topic of vegans, I do want to, I put a pin in that.
Yep, yep.
Because my wife was vegetarian for 10 years. We never did the vegan thing. I used to eat vegan food when I did triathlons, but only because my numbers were better for some reason. But I would love to talk a little bit about like when you're preparing nutrition and food, what fats are you using? What oils are you using to
Okay.
cook? What and
Yep.
why?
Yeah, so I basically just use ghee, butter, lard, and olive oil. I'm not in the camp that, like, if it's a seed and you use oil from it, it's going to give you immediate cancer, make your life worse. I don't think the evidence really supports that. I think a lot of times it's the industrialized process that people look at and go, oh, this must be bad for you because I don't like how it's processed. I don't think the literature actually supports that in a lot of cases. But my opposition to a lot of those industrial seed oils is more the process as opposed to the oil itself. Because, I mean, if you've used peanut oil, sesame seed oil, sunflower oil, those are seeds. They just get squished. You squish the seed, they're fatty, fat comes out, you can cook with it. How is that any worse? You know, understanding your omega-3, omega-6 ratios is important, but if you're using that much oil that often, that's probably the main problem. But myself, I use the oils I mentioned, lard, ghee, butter, olive oil for both the flavor and the cookability. So the saturated fats are higher smoke point. You can sizzle things with them, and it's not going to burn and create what is it, heterocyclic hydrocarbons and things that can be carcinogens. They just are more robust. Olive oil is actually pretty good for cooking. The smoke point isn't super low. It's not that fragile of an oil, but I use it for more fresh stuff. But yeah, that's usually where I go. And butter is delicious and awesome, but it actually has a pretty low smoke point. So I'll use ghee more often when I'm doing steak or sauteing some veggies or something like that.
Amazing. In my own imagination and my theater of the mind, I'm hearing everybody gasping and clutching their pearls because you said lard. But I know
I love lard.
anecdotally, and this is something, a choice that I made a little bit before we started working together, was to eliminate the seed oils, particularly anything from cotton seeds. Because in my mind, it's like,
It's
we
not even
probably
a
could eat
food.
some cotton seeds, but that quantity of cotton seed
Yeah.
is going to be kind of weird because that's what Crisco is. But I started using
And
lard.
that's hydrogenated as well. So
Exactly.
it's run through a process to make it solid as a replacement for lard and tallow
Yeah.
and saturated animal fats.
Well, so what we ended up started doing is I started rendering my own beef fat into tallow because I was doing a lot of
Nice.
brisket at the time, and we started cooking lard and frying chicken in lard. And
That's the way to do it.
so many people told me like, you're going to kill yourself. This is gonna be terrible. But at least anecdotally for me, my and triglycerides are both half of what they used to be. Have you
Yeah.
seen that in anyone else that isn't me? Because I've been told like, oh, you
Yes.
must be an alien.
Because a lot of those increased cholesterol numbers and triglycerides are due to more, from my understanding, inflammation. Like your body uses cholesterol to repair epithelial damage, the lining of the blood vessels, and so it pumps that in there to heal that. And that, why is it healing that? Well, because there's inflammation in the vessels, and so those numbers go up as you have more inflammation. And the issue with seed oils and things like that is less of the oils themselves, but the fact that a lot of them are not very stable and they're going off, they're going rancid, and you're consuming rancid oils, which, you need fats for your body to replace its cell membranes and regenerate new cells and things. And if you have rancid off oils coming in, like you don't really have any good building blocks. And so we have damage, oxidative damage. And what's interesting is saturated fats are really stable. There's a reason that your body stores all its energy stores as saturated fat, primarily saturated fat. But an interesting thing about lard is that when you look at the fat breakdown, so we've got saturated fats and then your unsaturated fats, mono and polyunsaturated. Your omega 3s and 6s are poly, meaning that there's multiple open carbon bonds that oxygen can then attach to, which is what creates oxidation and oxidative damage. So, like our really healthy oils, like our fish oils and stuff, are not stable and they can go off very easily. Monounsaturated, meaning one potential carbon bond site or one potential open site on a carbon bond, means there's only one opportunity for an oxygen molecule to attach to that and cause oxidation and breakdown. And if we think about oxidation, think about rust, iron oxide. That's what oxidation is. This is breaking down as oxygen molecules attached to open sites on whatever molecule we're talking about, the carbons usually. And so monounsaturated fats are pretty stable. Saturated fats are completely stable. You can basically put a jar of saturated fat, coconut oil, beef tallow being more saturated, and it's shelf stable forever, more or less. Lard actually has about the same monounsaturated content as olive oil. It's very similar. And so if you put olive oil in the fridge, it solidifies. And lard melts easier than tallow at room temperature or slightly above room temperature because it is less saturated than, say, coconut oil or beef tallow. And so people get up in arms about lard, but it's not that far off of the same fatty acid makeup as olive oil. And as a cultural note, there's been big divides in the various cultures and in the culinary communities about the difference between using lard and fat, or lard and tallow. And I had this old 1969 English cookbook, and there was like a one-page rant in there about how kids these days have switched to using lard for their fish and chips as opposed to tallow, and it's inferior because it doesn't give you the same golden brown crispiness that tallow did originally. And now we're sitting here going like, now they're boiling it in cottonseed oil, and it's like we're trying to go back to lard and tallow, and it's just funny how that always comes back around. But our animal fats are fine. They're stable. They taste good. They're less likely to go off. But in general, I think the issue is that people just eat too much of them in general.
Yeah, I love the historic thing of like those damn kids in their lard, because you hear that
Yeah,
so often of like damn kids in their phone. But when you
yeah.
like, I studied a lot of history when I was in college, and I read through all these like newspaper articles talking about how the newspaper itself was destroying society because people were reading the newspaper on the trolley rather than talking to each other. And
Seen
it,
old photos of that.
yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me. And like even my grandmother used to say in the later years of her life, she was really convinced that us abandoning lard was like what was dooming American society. But
It's good for your brain.
I, I mean, one of the things in working with my nutrition and stuff like that, I've had to learn how to cook. Like I've always been a very good cook, but I've had to be much more creative. And one of the things that I love to make is hot chicken sandwiches. And so we were making these Nashville hot chicken sandwiches. We've
Nice.
done it several times, but it was like we've always done it in the canola oil because that's what the recipe called for. And when we got done after eating it, like we felt bloated. My inflammation was up. Like I felt terrible. And so, but so it was a sometimes food. We get to now. We're getting rid of that. We're going to fry it in lard. And I felt better after eating that sandwich than I did before I ate that sandwich. It was the first time I've ever had that with fried food. So when you're talking about the rancidness,
Nice.
since then, when I've stepped into restaurants that have fryers going, I feel like I can smell it now. To be like, this
Yeah,
doesn't
you can.
smell like food. This smells like death.
Yeah, you can definitely smell off oil. Like if you leave a bottle of grapeseed oil or canola oil or random vegetable oil open on the countertop, like you come around to that in a few weeks and you smell it. It smells bad. It just doesn't have great shelf stability because it is primarily unsaturated. That's what makes it liquid at room temperature too, is it's unsaturated. And like avocado and olive oil have a lot of monounsaturated fats in them, so they are not 100% shelf stable, but less prone to going rancid than the polyunsaturated oils.
Amazing. So, other than just the fats, what are some of the other things for people who are listening? Like, they're starting to get hungry. We're talking about fats. We're talking about food and cooking.
Yeah, I'm
What
getting hungry
is
too.
What are some of the other things that like the average person isn't going to think of in terms of how they can live a more human centered existence with their food? Because I imagine the bag of Funyuns is probably not a very human centric food.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the shorter the food chain or the shorter the food distance, the better. So my philosophy is what I call a locavore diet. The more local, the better. You're not going to go to the factory and top up your canola oil jug. You're not going to go down to the sugar factory and top up your tub of white sugar. But you can source pretty much any animal product within the state in almost anywhere you are. Your dairy, and especially your fermented dairies, are pretty readily accessible from most places. Your animals are raised everywhere. The reason that there's so much animal agriculture is because it's easier to raise animals on less than ideal land than it is to grow wheat. And it's less labor intensive, and you get way more nutrients in the same plot of land. Like a cow can feed a small family for 9 months, but if you grow wheat for a family, you need a lot of land. And it's just one of those things like the more you think local and what's actually available in your locale and in your season, the easier it is to be healthy. Like if you're buying strawberries from California in the winter and you live in New York, like the distance they have to travel and the stuff they have to spray on those and the amount of effort that goes into keeping them cool and safe and packaged, like not only does your effect on your ecosystem increase, but you just aren't getting anything fresh and you're not getting as much nutrients. So you're better off eating local, eating from the smallest distance you can, and then thinking about, okay, how are things stored? If you can eat fresh things, it's better. Well, if you can't have fresh things, fermented things. Eating your fermented veggies in the winter is a very natural seasonal way of eating. Your fresh thing, like if you're eating salad in the middle of winter, where the hell did that come from? No one's ever done that in the history of humanity. You're not eating lettuce leaves in December in Minnesota. You might have some old tough cabbages sitting in the basement, but it's sauerkraut and pickles and fermented things, and you're eating a lot of animal products. And in the spring and summer, you're eating a lot of fresh veggies because that's actually what's growing. And so thinking about locale and seasonality with your food probably solve a lot of problems because you can't really overeat seasonally. It's only when you're shipping things from all over that's highly processed and in huge quantities. Like you can't eat that much of what's growing at that time of year, enough to cause obesity and health concerns,
100%. And this kind of ties right back into what we're talking about. No one's worked on a farm. They're not going to be in touch with their food. And I remember having a conversation with one of my aunts who's maybe one of those lefty greeny people you were talking about earlier. And she was eating asparagus. And I was like, it is February in Wisconsin. Where do you think that came from? She's like, oh, it's growing on a farm. I was like, yeah, but where? And the answer was
Yeah.
Argentina. Where like we this kicked off an
Oh, wow.
entire
Yeah.
like conversation about where our food is coming from and where we get closer. And I don't know what it is in Tasmania, but around where I live, right on the edge of the Denver metro area. So we have a lot of farms that are close by. And so one of the things we did when we first got here was, I'm from Wisconsin, so obviously cheese and dairy that runs in my blood. And I found a local dairy, and the cows that our milk come
Cool.
from are literally less than 10 miles from where I live. And they bring us cheese and they bring
Great.
us dairy. I'm still looking for a source for farm fresh eggs. But I know you have chickens, don't you? So I would love, I mean, maybe it's been too long, but what is the difference between that fresh egg from the chicken versus what you get in the grocery store?
Honestly, it's a little tricky. So when I go back to the States, I realize there's a huge food quality difference between what is commonly available in grocery stores there and what is available here. Like we've got year-round growing seasons. We can get veggies year-round because one state above you, it's a season behind you. So here in Tasmania, even our grocery store eggs are pretty damn good. But when I go back to the States, I'm like looking at these sloppy, pale yellow things that come out of a shell. And I'm like, what is this? It's the same with the butter. I notice in the US, your butter's white. Our butter looks like cheese here. It's yellow because it's coming fresh from the perpetually growing grass on the north side of the island or from New Zealand, or because like New Zealand's 3 hours away. Like we're getting incredibly fresh produce from the mainland locally or from 3 hours away. And the quality is generally quite good. That said, even so, like eggs that you grow yourself, or you don't grow them yourself, you raise the chickens and they make them. But there is the whites are denser and thicker. The yellow, the orange of the yolk is much more vibrant. But a lot of that also is freshness. Freshness makes a huge difference as well.
Yeah, the first time I ever had a farm fresh egg, I thought there was something wrong with it. It was just how together it was. And the woman who ran the kitchen at the farm that I was working on at the time, she cracked the egg and she grabbed a pair of chopsticks and pulled the yolk out with the chopsticks. And I was just like blown away that this was even possible.
Yeah, they're so
Amazing.
dense.
Yeah, well, and you got to think that that's more what our ancestors were reading in the beginning.
It's close too. Like this is the thing too. I'm not really a recreationist. It's like the food we're eating isn't what hunter gatherers ate, but we want a close approximation.
100%. So if there's somebody who's listening to this and they're like, okay, I get the food thing, I got the Strong for Life. What's the sales pitch on why would somebody need to hire the coach and bring that professional in to be able to help them with this journey? Why do you think that's a needed thing?
The long answer comes down to the questions that I'll ask. So someone will be like, hey, first off, they'll be like, how much does it cost? And I'll be like, that doesn't matter because we haven't decided if you're going to be a client. So let's look at this. What are you trying to achieve? And they'll say something like 9 out of 10 times, weight loss. It's like, great. What are you doing right now about that? And they'll say, everything I'm doing is perfect. I'm like, okay, that's not true. But how long have you been dealing with this? Oh, 5, 10, 20 years. I'm like, okay. So if you haven't accomplished it under your own means in that time, you absolutely 100% need help. Whether that's going to be me or someone else, that's to be decided. But you can't come to me and go, oh no, I'm doing everything great, but I've not accomplished my goals in X number of years. I'll be like, no, that's bullshit. I call people out on this all the time because the biggest thing that they lack is accountability. Like, you can find a gym plan on the internet. You can find a diet plan. You can just log into MyFitnessPal and follow the formula. All those things will elicit a level of results on their own. But unless they have accountability and someone to say, hey, I noticed that you didn't do what you said you were going to do, or say, hey, great job on getting the thing done that you need to do to get where you want to be. If someone lacks that, whether it's a community or an individual like a coach, only 1 in 1,000 is actually going to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. And it's usually young people who don't have any responsibilities and live at home because they're like, I have the time, I have the resources, nothing better to do but get jacked. But if you're a busy parent or a professional, the accountability is probably the most important thing. And I'm usually talking to people who have spent years telling themselves that they're doing the right thing, but never getting where they want to be. And so the number one thing is, if you haven't done it, you're not going to do it magically. You need help. And the biggest thing you need is someone to hold you accountable so you actually do the work. The second most important thing is being told what that work is. Because, and this is part of my application process and interview process with clients is, okay, what have you been doing? What has held you back from achieving your goals while doing this? What challenges have you run into? And then it's roadblocks. What is it that is stopping you from figuring it out on your own? Information's free these days. You can figure everything out on the internet. I mean, there's no excuse for not knowing the basics if you want to, but there's usually a roadblock. The challenge is usually figuring out what those basics are, and some people don't get that far. The roadblock stopping them from achieving that is usually something like, I have 5 kids and I'm a single mom, or I'm a stay-at-home mom, or I run a business and I just don't have time, or some combination of the two. It's like, okay, that's a legit reason. Yeah, that's you have other priorities. So you may want to change your health. You may want to change your physique, but other priorities have gotten in the way of figuring out how to do it on your own. And that's where people like us come in, the coaches, to go, okay, don't waste your time and energy figuring out how to do it. Follow our instructions. Let us hold you accountable, bring you into a community of people doing the same thing, walking the same path, and we'll do it together. And then that way you don't stress about what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. You just tick the boxes. And every time you tick a box, well, you're one step closer to where you want to be, as opposed to spending the last 2 to 20 years not getting anywhere and sliding further and further behind.
Yeah, I know when I first started really getting serious about it, my parents were like, well, why are you doing this? Right? Because my family culture, the men they work until they break and they die quietly in the corner. That is what the men of my family do. And so that's where I was.
At least you have traditions.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, like when we first started working together, if I got 2,000 steps in a day, it was an active day, right? It's like, no, you got to get out there. You got to do this. But my wife's response to the questioning of why I was training, she's like, Dylan's training to be 90. And I think about the cost that comes into that I'm paying to hire a professional to help hold me accountable, to give me those boxes to check because I just got too much other stuff on my plate. And every time I think about it and I look at my budget, I'm like, oh man, that's a reoccurring expense. But then I go and figure out what a triple bypass is going to cost me, or what cancer is going to cost me, or less, or how much would I pay for more time with my daughters, right? If I make it to 90, when I make it to 90, I will have the high score for men in my family. No man in my family has hit 90. And so it's
a powerful motivation.
That's the goal. Well, this has been an amazing discussion about fitness and nature and food. And I would love to keep talking, but I want to be respectful of your time. But for those people who are listening, how can they find more Josh Wood?
Just at Coach Josh Wood on Instagram. You can head to strongforlife.online, which is the website, which will send you to all the socials and the tube resources and the Eat Like an Adult guide and all that stuff. So those are probably the two best places. You can just Google me, Coach Josh Wood. I show up on most platforms.
Fantastic. Highly, highly recommend you look into Strong for Life coaching. It is revolutionizing how I look at my fitness, and I know it would help you as well. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. The conversation doesn't end here. Please share this show with friends and make sure you keep up with all the latest updates on Instagram and Threads at The Dylan Bain, and dive deeper into the world of finance with me at dylanbain.com, where you'll find insights, resources, and strategies to reimagine your money story.